Well, good morning and welcome back to my channel. I am your loyal Hufflepuff, and today we'll be going over Shadow and Bone. Shadow and Bone is the first book of a trilogy titled Shadow and Bone, and there's currently a series based off of this book, which is also titled Shadow and Bone, and it's also based off a duology titled Six of Crows. There is an upcoming season on Netflix of season 2, which I believe is going to be based off the second book of the series. I can't confirm this because I haven't seen the first season yet, but as soon as I finish watching the first season, I will also do a book comparison with the show and see how the two compare. So without further ado, let us go ahead and start reading chapter 20. We walked in silence for over an hour. I stared numbly down at my feet, watching my boots move through the snow, thinking about the stag and the price of my weakness. Eventually, I saw firelight flickering through the trees, and we emerged into a clearing where a small camp had been made around a roaring fire. I noted several small tents and a group of horses tethered amid the trees. Two Opshniki sat beside the fire, eating their evening meal. Maul's guards took him to one of the tents, pushing him inside and following after. I tried to catch his eye, but he disappeared too quickly. Ivan dragged me across the camp to another tent and gave me a shove. Inside, I saw several bedrolls laid out. He pushed me forward and gestured to the pole at the center of the tent. "Sit," he ordered. I sat with my back to the pole, and he tethered me to it, tying my hands behind my back and binding my ankles. "Comfortable?" "You know what he plans to do, Ivan. He plans to bring us peace." "At what price?" I asked desperately. "You know this is madness." "Did you know I had 2 brothers?" Ivan asked abruptly. The familiar smirk was gone from his handsome face. "Of course not. They weren't born Grisha. They were soldiers, and they both died fighting the king's war. So did my father. So did my uncle." "I'm sorry." "Yes, everyone is sorry. The king is sorry. The queen is sorry. I'm sorry. But only the Darkling will do something about it." "It doesn't have to be this way, Ivan. My power could be used to destroy the Fold." Ivan shook his head. "The Darkling knows what has to be done. He'll never stop. You know that. Not once he's had a taste of that kind of power. I'm the one wearing the collar now, but eventually it will be all of you, and there won't be anyone or anything strong enough to stand in his way." A muscle twitched in Ivan's jaw. "Keep talking treason and I'll gag you," he said, and without another word, he strode out of the tent. A while later, a summoner and a heartrender ducked inside. I didn't recognize either of them. Avoiding my gaze, they silently hunched into their furs and blew out the lamp. I sat awake in the dark, watching the flickering light of the campfire play over the canvas walls of the tent. I could feel the weight of the collar against my neck, and my bound hands itched to claw at it. I thought of Maul just a few feet away in another tent. I'd brought us to this. If I'd taken the stag's life, his power would have been mine. I'd known that mercy might cost us my freedom, Maul's life, the lives of countless others, and still I'd been too weak to do what needed to be done. That night, I dreamed of the stag. I saw the Darkling cut his throat again and again. I saw the life fading from his dark eyes. But when I looked down, it was my blood that spilled red into the snow. With a gasp, I woke to the sound of the camp coming to life around me. The tent flap opened and a heartrender appeared. She cut me loose from the tent pole and dragged me to my feet. My body creaked and popped in protest, stiff from a night spent sitting in a cramped position. The Render led me over to where the horses were already saddled, and the Darkling stood talking quietly to Ivan and the other Grisha. I looked around for Maul and felt a sudden jab of panic when I couldn't find him. But then I saw an Oprichnik pull from pull from an, from the other tent. What do we do with him? The guard asked Ivan. Let the traitor walk, Ivan replied. And when he gets too tired, let the horses drag him. I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could say a word, the Darkling spoke. No, he said gracefully, mounting his horse. I want him alive when we reach the shadow fold. The guard shrugged and helped Maul mount his horse, then tied his shackled hands to the saddle horn. I felt a rush of relief, followed by a sharp prickle of fear. Did the Darkling intend for Maul to stand trial, or did he have something far worse in mind for him? He's still alive, I told myself, and that means there's still a chance to save him. Ride with her, the Darkling said to Ivan. Make sure she doesn't do anything stupid. He didn't spare me another glance as he kicked his horse into a trot. We rode for hours through the forest, past the plateau where Maul and I had waited for the herd. I could just see the boulders where we'd spent the night, and I wondered if the light that had kept us alive through the snowstorm had been the very thing that led the Darkling to us. I knew he was taking us back to Kribursk, but I hated it to think what might be waiting for me there. Who would the Darkling choose to move against first? Would he launch a fleet of sandskiffs north to Freda? Or did he intend to march south to drive the fold into the Shuhan, whose deaths would be on my hands? It took another night and day of travel before we reached the wide roads that would lead us south to Devai. We were met at the crossroads by a huge contingent of armed men, most of them in Operchniki gray. They brought fresh horses and the Darkling's coach. Ivan dumped me on the velvet cushions with little ceremony and climbed inside after me. Then, with a snap of the reins, we were moving again. Ivan insisted we keep the curtains drawn, but I snuck a peek outside and saw that we were flanked by heavily armed riders. It was hard not to be reminded of the first trip I'd made with Ivan in this same vehicle. The soldiers made camp at night, but I was kept in isolation, confined to the Darkling's coach. Ivan brought me my meals, clearly disgusted at having to play nursemaid. He refused to speak to me as we rode and threatened to slow my pulse enough to send me into unconsciousness if I persisted in asking about Maul. But I asked every day anyway and kept my eyes trained on the little crack of window visible between curtain and coach, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. I slept poorly. Every night I dreamed of the snowy glade and the stag's dark eyes, staring at me in the stillness. It was a nightly reminder of my failure and the sorrow my mercy had reaped. The stag had died anyway, and now Maul and I were doomed. Every morning I woke with a fresh sense of guilt and shame, but also with the frustrating feeling that I was forgetting something. Some message that had been clear and obvious in the dream, but that hovered just outside of understanding when I woke. I didn't see the Darkling again until we reached the outskirts of Kribursk, when the door to the coach suddenly opened, and he slid into the seat opposite me. Ivan vanished without a word. Where's Maul? I asked as soon as the door had closed. I saw the fingers of his gloved hand clench, but when he spoke, his voice was as cold and smooth as ever. We're entering Kribursk, she said. When we are greeted by the other Grisha, you will not say a word about your little excursion. My jaw dropped. They don't know? All they know is that you've been in seclusion, preparing for your crossing of the Shadowfold with prayer and rest. A dry bark of laughter escaped me. I certainly look well rested. I'll, I'll say you've been fasting. That's why none of the soldiers in Rivast were looking for me. I said with dawning understanding. You never told the king. If word of your disappearance had gotten out, you would have been hunted down and killed by Fredan assassins within days, and you would have had to account for losing the kingdom's only sun summoner. The Darkling studied me for a long moment. Just what kind of life do you think you could have with him, Alina? He's Odkadsia. He could never hope to understand your power, and if he did, he'd only come to fear you. There is no ordinary life for people like you and me. I'm nothing like you, I said flatly. His lips curled in a tight, bitter smile. Of course not, he said courteously. Then he knocked on the roof of the coach, and it rolled to a stop. When we arrive, you'll say your hellos, then plead exhaustion, and retire to your tent. And if you do anything reckless, I will torture the tracker until he begs me to take his life. And he was gone. I rode the rest of the way into Kribersk alone, trying to stop trembling. Maul is alive, I told myself. That's all that matters. But another thought crept in. Maybe the Darkling is letting you believe he's still alive, just to keep you in line. I wrapped my arms around myself, praying that it wasn't true. I pulled back the curtains as we rode through Kribersk and felt a pang of sadness as I remembered walking this same road so many months ago. I'd nearly been crushed by the very coach I was riding in. Maul had saved me, and Zoya had looked at him from the window of the summoner's coach. I'd wished to be like her, a beautiful girl in a blue kefta. When we finally pulled up to the immense black silk tent, a crowd of Grisha swarmed around the coach. Marie and Ivo and Sergei rushed forward to greet me. I was surprised at how good it felt to see them again. As they caught sight of me, their excitement vanished, replaced by worry and concern. They'd expected a triumphant sun summoner, wearing the greatest amplifier ever known, radiant with power and the favor of the Darkling. Instead, they saw a pale, tired girl, broken by misery. Are you all right? Marie whispered when she hugged me. Yes, I promised, just worn out from the journey. I did my best to smile convincingly and reassure them. I tried to feign enthusiasm as they marveled at Rosova's collar and reached out to touch it. The Darkling was never far from view, a warning in his eyes, and it kept moving forward and I kept moving through the crowd, grinning until my cheeks hurt. As we passed through the Grisha pavilion, I caught sight of Zoya sulking on a pile of cushions. She stared greedily at the collar as I passed. You're welcome to it, I thought bitterly, and hurried my steps. Ivan led me to a private tent close to the Darkling's quarters. Fresh clothes were waiting on my camp cot, along with a tub of hot water and my blue kefta. It had only been a few weeks, but it felt strange to wear summoner's colors again. The Darkling's guards were stationed all around the perimeter of my tent. Only I knew they were there to monitor as well as to protect me. The tent was luxuriously appointed with piles of furs, a painted table and chairs, and a fabricator mirror, clear as water and inlaid with gold. I would have traded it all in an instant to shiver beside Maul on a bear blanket. I had no visitors, and I spent my days pacing back and forth with nothing to do but worry and imagine the worst. I didn't know why the Darkling was waiting to enter the Shadowfold, or what he might be planning, and my guards certainly weren't interested in discussing it. On the fourth night, when the flap of my tent opened, I nearly fell off my cot. There was Genya, holding my dinner tray and looking impossibly gorgeous. I sat up, unsure of what to say. She entered and set down the tray, hovering near the table. I shouldn't be here, she said. Probably not, I admitted. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to have. I'm not sure that I'm supposed to have visitors. No, I mean I shouldn't be here. It's incredibly dirty. I laughed, suddenly very glad to see her. She smiled slightly and settled herself gracefully on the edge of the painted chair. They're saying you've been in seclusion, preparing for your ordeal, she said. I examined Genya's face, trying to glean how much she knew. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye before I went away, I said carefully. If you had, I should have stopped you, so she knew I'd run. How's Bagra? No one's seen her since you left. She seems to have gone into seclusion too. I shuddered. I hoped that Bagra had escaped, but I knew it was unlikely. What price had a darkling exacted for her betrayal? I bit my lip, hesitating, and then decided to take what might be my only chance. Genya, if I could get word to the king, I'm sure he doesn't know what the darkling is planning. Alina, Alina, Genya interrupted. The king has taken ill. The apparat is ruling in his stead. My heart sank. I remembered what the darkling had said that the day that I met the apparat. He has his uses. And yet the priest hadn't just spoken of toppling kings, but darklings as well. Had he been trying to warn me? If only I'd been less fearful. If only I'd been more willing to listen. More regrets to add to my long list. I didn't know if the apparat was truly loyal to the darkling, or if he might be playing a deeper game. And now there is no way to find out. The hope that the king might have the desire or will to oppose the darkling had been a slim one, but it had given me something to hold on to over the last few days. Now that hope was undone too. What about the queen? I asked with a faint optimism. A fierce little smile passed over Genya's lips. The queen is confined to her quarters. For her own safety, of course. Contagion, you know. That was when I realized what Genya was wearing. I'd been so surprised to see her, so caught up in my own thoughts, that I hadn't really taken it in. Genya was wearing red, corporalky red. Her cuffs were embroidered with blue, in a combination I had never seen before. A chill slid up my spine. What role had Genya played in the king's sudden illness? What had she traded to wear full Grishov colors? I see, I said quietly. I did try to warn you, she said with some sadness. And you know what the Darkling plans to do? There are rumors, she said uncomfortably. They're all true. Then it has to be done. I stared at her. After a moment, she looked down at her lap. Her fingers pleated and unpleated the folds of her kefta. David feels terrible, she whispered. He thinks he's destroyed all of Ravka. It's not his fault, I said with an empty laugh. We all did our part to bring about the end of the world. Genya looked up sharply. You don't really believe that? Distress was written on her face. Was there a warning as well? I thought of Maul and the Darkling's threats. No, I said hollowly. Of course not. I knew she didn't believe me, but her brow cleared and she smiled her soft, beautiful smile at me. She looked like a painted icon of a saint, her hair burnished copper halo. She rose, and as I walked with her to the flap of the tent, the stag's dark eyes loomed up in my mind, the eyes I saw every night in my dreams. For what it's worth, I said, tell David I forgive him. And I forgive you too, I added silently. I meant it. I knew what it was to want to belong. I will, she said quietly. She turned and disappeared into the night. but not before I saw that her lovely eyes were full of tears. The end of chapter 20, and I might have some time to do chapter 21. Yeah, looks like we've got some time to do chapter 21 as well. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and read chapter 21 as well. I picked up my dinner and then lay down on my cot again, turning over the things that Genya had said. Genya had spent nearly her entire life cloistered away in Alta, existing uneasily between the world of the Grisha and the intrigues of the court. The Darkling had put her in that position for his own gain, and now he had raised her out of it. She would never again have to bend to the whim of the king and queen, or wear a servant's colors. But David had regrets, and if he did, maybe others did too. Maybe there would be more when the Darkling unleashed the Shadowfold's power, though by then it might be too late. My thoughts were interrupted by Ivan's arrival at the entrance to my tent. Up, he commanded. He wants to see you. My stomach twisted nervously, but I got up and followed him. As soon as we stepped out of the tent, we were flanked by guards who escorted us the short distance to the Darkling's quarters. When they saw Ivan, the Oprichniki at the entryway stepped aside. Ivan nodded toward the tent. Go on, he said with a smirk. I desperately wanted to smack that knowing look right off his face. Instead, I lifted my chin and strode past him. The heavy silk slid close behind me, and I took a few steps forward, then paused to get my bearings. The tent was large and lit by dimly glowing lamps. The floor was covered in rugs and furs, and at its center burned a fire that crackled in a large silver dish. High above it, a flap in the roof of the tent allowed the smoke to escape and showed a patch of the night sky. The Darkling sat in a large chair, his long legs sprawled out before him, staring into the fire, a glass in his hand and a bottle of kvass on the table beside him. Without looking at me, he gestured into the chair across from him. I walked over to the fire, but I did not sit. He glanced at me with faint exasperation, and then looked back into the flames. Sit down, Alina. I perched on the edge of the chair, watching him warily. Speak, he said. I was starting to feel like a dog. I have nothing to say. I imagine you have a great deal to say. If I tell you to stop, you won't stop. If I tell you you're mad, you won't believe me. Why should I bother? Maybe because you want the boy to live. All of the breath went out of me, and I had to stifle a sob. Maul was alive. The Darkling might be lying, but I didn't think so. He loved power, and Maul's life gave him power over me. Tell me what to say to save him, I whispered, leaning forward. Tell me, and I'll say it. He's a traitor and a deserter. He's the best tracker you have or ever will have. Possibly, said the Darkling, with an indifferent shrug. But I knew him better now, and I saw the flicker of greed in his eyes as he tilted his head back to empty his glass of kvass. I knew it would it cost him to think of destroying something that he might acquire and use. I pressed the small advantage. You could exile him, send him north to the permafrost until you need him. You'd have him spend the rest of his life in a work camp or a prison? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yes. You think you'll find a way to him, don't you? He asked, his voice bemused. You think that somehow, if he's alive, you'll find a way. He shook his head and gave a short laugh. I've given you power beyond all dreaming. And you can't wait to run off and keep house for your tracker. I knew I should stay silent, play a diplomat, but I couldn't help myself. You haven't given me anything. You've made me a slave. That's never what I intended, Alina. He ran a hand over his jaw, his expression fatigued, frustrated, human. But how much of it was real and how much was pretense? I couldn't take chances, he said. Not with the power of the stag. Not with Ravka's future hanging in the balance. Don't pretend this is about Ravka's welfare. You lied to me. You've been lying to me since the moment I met you. His long fingers tightened around the glass. Did you deserve my trust? He asked, and for once his voice was less than steady and cold. Bagra whispers a few accusations in your ear, and off you go. Did you ever stop to think of what it would mean for me, for all of Ravka, if you just disappeared? You didn't give me much choice. Of course you had a choice, and you chose to turn your back on your country and on everything you are. That isn't fair. Fairness, he laughed. Still she talks of fairness. What does fairness have to do with any of this? The people curse my name and pray for you, but you're the one who is ready to abandon them. I'm the one who will give them power over their enemies. I'm the one who will free them from the tyranny of the king and give them your tyranny in return. Someone has to lead, Alina. Someone has to end this. Believe me, I wish there was another way. He sounded so sincere, so reasonable, less a creature of relentless ambition than a man who believed he was doing the right thing for his people, despite all he'd done and he intended. I did almost believe him. Almost. I gave a single shake of my head. He slumped back in his chair. Fine, he said with a weary shrug. Make me your villain. He set his empty glass down and stood. Come here. Fear shot through me, but I made myself rise and close the distance between us. He studied me in the firelight. He reached out and touched Morozova's collar, letting his long fingers spread over the rough bone, then slide up my neck to cradle my face with one hand. I felt a jolt of revulsion, but I also felt the sure, intoxicating force of him. I hated that it still had an effect on me. You betrayed me, he said softly. I wanted to laugh. I had betrayed him? He had used me, seduced me, and now enslaved me, and I was the betrayer? But I thought of Maul and swallowed my anger and my pride. Yes, I said. I'm sorry for that. He laughed. You're not sorry for any of it. The only thought you have is for the boy and his miserable life. I said nothing. Tell me, he said, his grip tightening painfully, his fingertips pressing into my flesh. In the firelight, his gaze looked unfathomably bleak. Tell me how much you love him. Beg for his life. Please, I whispered, fighting the tears that welled in my eyes. Please spare him. Why? Because the collar can't give you what you want, I said recklessly. I had only one thing with which to bargain, and it was so little, but I pressed on. I have no choice but to serve you, but if Maul comes to harm, I will never forgive you. I will fight you any way that I can. I will spend every waking minute looking for a way to end my life, and eventually I'll succeed. But show him mercy. Let him live, and I will serve you gladly. I will spend the rest of my days proving my gratitude. I nearly choked out the last word. He cocked his head to one side, a small, skeptical smile playing about his lips. Then the smile disappeared, replaced by something I didn't recognize, something that looked almost like longing. Mercy, he said the word as if he were tasting something unfamiliar. I could be merciful. He raised his other hand to cup my face and kiss me softly, gently, and though everything in me rebelled, I let him. I hated him. I feared him. But still I felt the strange tug of his power, and I couldn't stop the hungry response of my own treacherous heart. He pulled away and looked at me. Then his eyes still locked on mine. He called for Ivan. Take her to the cells, the darkling said when Ivan appeared in the doorway of the tent. Let her see her tracker. A sliver of hope entered my heart. Yes, Alina, he said, stroking my cheek. I can be merciful. He leaned forward, pulling me close, his lips brushing my ear. Tomorrow we enter the shadow fold. He whispered, his voice like a caress. And when we do, I will feed your friend to the Volcra, and you will watch him die. No, I cried, recoiling in horror. I tried to pull away from him, but his grip was like steel, his fingers digging into my skull. You said, "You may say your goodbyes tonight. That is all the mercy traitors deserve." Something broke loose inside me. I lunged at him, clawing at him, screaming at my hate. Ivan was on me in moments, holding me tight as I thrashed and strained in his arms. "Murderer!" I shouted. "Monster!" All of those things. "I hate you," I spat. He shrugged. "You'll tire of hate soon enough. You'll tire of everything." He smiled, and behind his eyes I saw the same bleak and yawning chasm I had seen in Bagra's ancient gaze. "You will wear the collar for the rest of your very, very long life, Alina. Fight me as long as you're able. You will find I have far more practice with eternity." He waved his hand dismissively, and Ivan pulled me from the tent and down the path, still struggling. A sob tore loose from my throat. The tears I had fought to hold back during my conversation with the Darkling gave way and streamed unchecked down my cheeks. "Stop that," Ivan whispered furiously. "Someone will see you." "I don't care." The Darkling was going to kill Maul anyway. What difference did it make who saw my misery now? The reality of Maul's death and the Darkling's cruelty were staring me in the face, and I saw the stark and horrible shape of things to come. Ivan yanked me into my tent and gave me a rough shake. "Do you want to see the tracker or not? I'm not going to march a weeping girl through the camp." I pressed my hands against my eyes and stifled my sobs. "Better," he said. "Put this on." He tossed me a long brown cloak. I slipped it over my kefta, and he yanked the large hood up. "Keep your head down and stay quiet, or I swear I'll drag you right back here and you can say your goodbyes on the fold. Understand?" I nodded. We followed an unlit path that skirted the perimeter of the camp. My guards kept their distance, walking far ahead and far behind us, and I quickly realized that Ivan did not want anyone to recognize me or to know I was visiting the jail. As we walked between the barracks and tents, I could sense a strange tension crackling through the camp. The soldiers we passed seemed jumpy, and a few glared at Ivan with blatant hostility. I wondered how the First Army felt about the apparat's sudden rise to power. The jail was located on the far side of camp. It was an older building, clearly from a time predating the barracks that surrounded it. Board guards flanked the entrance. "New prisoner?" one of them asked Ivan. "A visitor." "Since when do you escort visitors to cells?" "Since tonight," Ivan said, a dangerous edge to his voice. The guards exchanged a nervous glance and stepped aside. "No need to get antsy, bloodletter." Ivan led me down a hallway lined with mostly empty cells. I saw a few ragged men, a drunk snoring soundly on the floor of his cell. At the end of the hall, Ivan unlocked a gate, and we descended a set of rickety stairs to a dark, windowless room lit by a single glittering lamp. In the gloom, I could make out the heavy iron bars of the room's only cell, and, sitting slumped by its far wall, its only prisoner. "Maul?" I whispered. In seconds, he was on his feet, and we were clinging to each other through the iron bars, our hands clasped tightly together. I couldn't stop the sobs that shook me. "Shh. It's okay, Alina. It's okay." "You have the night," said Ivan, and disappeared back up the stairs. When we heard the outer gate clang shut, Maul turned to me. His eyes roved over my face. "I can't believe he let you come." Fresh tears spilled over my cheeks. Maul, he let me come because when? He asked hoarsely. Tomorrow, on the shadow fold. He swallowed, and I could see him struggle with the knowledge, but all he said was, "All right." I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Only you could contemplate imminent death and just say, "All right." He smiled at me and pushed the hair back from my tear-stained face. How about, "Oh no"? Maul, if I'd been stronger, if I'd been stronger, I would have driven a knife through your heart. Wish you had, I muttered. Well, I don't. I looked down at our clasped hands. Maul, what Darkling said in the glade about him and me, I didn't. I never. It doesn't matter. I looked up at him. It doesn't? No, he said a little too fiercely. I don't think I believe you. So maybe I don't believe it yet either. Not completely, but it's the truth. He clutched my hands more tightly, holding them close to his heart. I don't care if you danced naked on the roof of the little palace with him. I love you, Alina. Even the part of you that loved him. I wanted to deny it, to erase it, but I couldn't. Another sob shook me. I hate that I ever thought that I ever. Do you blame me for every mistake I made, for every girl I tumbled, for every dumb thing I've said? Because if we start running tallies on stupid, you know who's going to come out ahead. No, I don't blame you. I managed a small smile. Much. He grinned, and my heart flipped and flopped the way it always had. We found our way back to each other, Elena. That's all that matters. He kissed me through the bars, the cold iron pressing against my cheek as his lips met mine. We stayed together that last night. We talked about the orphanage, the angry rasp of Anakoya's voice, the taste of stolen cherry cordial, the smell of the new mown grass in our meadow. How we'd suffered in the heat of summer and sought out the cool comfort of the music room's marble floors. The journey we'd made together on the way to do our military service. The Sully violins we'd heard our first night away from the only home either of us could remember. I told him the story of the day I'd been mending pottery with one of the maids in the kitchen at Karamzin, waiting for him to return from one of the hunting trips that had taken him from home more and more frequently. I'd been 15, standing at the counter, vainly trying to glue together the jagged pieces of a blue cup. When I saw him crossing the fields, I ran to the doorway and waved. He caught sight of me and broke into a jog. I had crossed the yard to him slowly, watching him draw closer, baffled by the way my heart was skittering around in my chest. Then he picked me up and spun me in a circle, and I'd clung to him, breathing in his familiar swell. Sorry, breathing in his sweet, familiar smell, shocked by how much I'd missed him. Dimly, I'd been aware that I still had a shard of the blue cup in my hand, that it was digging into my palm, but I didn't want to let go. When he finally set me down and ambled off to the kitchen to find his lunch, I had stood there, my palm dripping blood, my head still spinning, knowing that everything had changed. Anakoya had scolded me for getting blood on the clean kitchen floor. She'd bandaged my hand and told me it would heal, but I knew it would just go on hurting. In the creaking silence of the cell, Maul kissed the scar on my palm, the wound made so long ago by the edge of that broken cup, a fragile thing I'd thought beyond repair. We fell asleep on the floor, cheeks pressed together through the bars, hands clasped tight. I didn't want to sleep. I wanted to savor every last moment with him. But I must have dozed off because I dreamed again of the stag. This time, Maul was beside me in the glade, and it was his blood in the snow. The next thing I knew, I was waking to the sound of the gate being opened above us and Ivan's footsteps on the stairs. Maul had made me promise not to cry. He'd said it would only make it harder on him, so I swallowed my tears. I kissed him one last time and let Ivan lead me away. The end of chapter 21. And do we have time to read one last chapter? Or is this... Yeah, it's probably, we'll save this for another day. Probably tomorrow, yeah. I'll read this last bit tomorrow. Alright, so that was the end of chapters 20 and 21. We are on the final 2 chapters of this book. This last chapter definitely made me sad because I enjoyed their relationship in this book. I'm hoping that, because I've yet to finish this book, I'm hoping that this will end well and that Maul escapes, but if not, I don't know what's gonna happen. So I hope this turns out really well in the end, even though this is a trilogy. But I'm very excited to see how this really does compare to the show. So until my next video, I'm the Loyal Hufflepuff, and if you like this, please make a comment down below, and if you are enjoying this episode, please like it, and if you are wanting more updates and would like to see more of this, please subscribe to my channel so that way you can stay updated and you guys will get to see more videos posted. I try to do this on a regular basis, on a daily basis. I'm trying to do it on a daily basis. But there are going to be days where I'm going to be tired, exhausted, or doing something else. So, anyway, please subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you all in the next video. And I am the Loyal Hufflepuff. See you all in the next video.